The Panama Canal moves 5% of the world's maritime trade across 50 miles of jungle. It took more than 25,000 lives to build. The reservoir that feeds its locks is drying up. In 2023 and 2024, it went through its worst drought on record, forcing authorities to slash daily transits from 36 down to 18. The Canal Authority just approved a $1.6 billion dam to keep it running, a fix that won't be ready until 2030. 6,000 miles away, a different crisis is unfolding. The Strait of Hormuz, the corridor that carries 20% of the world's oil, is effectively closed or not, depending on the day you're watching it. Ships are trapped, oil prices have crossed $120 a barrel. And in March 2026, a former Speaker of the House had a suggestion: cut a new canal entirely, use nuclear bombs to do it. Most people laughed. They probably shouldn't have, because the United States government already built the entire engineering case for this. Not in the Middle East, not in Central America, but across both. They surveyed the routes, they ran the numbers, spending $6 billion in today's money on research alone. And they didn't stop at a social media post, 294 of them. Before we get to the canal, you need to understand the technology, because this was grounded in real physics. When Oppenheimer watched the first nuclear device detonate in New Mexico, he quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Edward Teller watched the same explosion and felt something completely different. Not horror, possibility. If a nuclear bomb could vaporize a city, what could it do to a mountain? What could it do to a jungle? What could it do to an entire isthmus? The mechanism is straightforward in concept. Bury the device deep enough and the blast creates a crater from below rather than from above. The energy that would level a city instead displaces millions of tons of earth in seconds, clean, fast, and at a fraction of the cost of conventional excavation. On paper, at least. The physicist behind it was Edward Teller, the man who built the hydrogen bomb and spent the rest of his career trying to justify it. His belief, held with complete sincerity, was that if nuclear explosives could be made practical enough, useful enough, they would lose their terror. A world that used nuclear devices to dig canals was a world that had domesticated the bomb. The program for it was even named for it, Plowshare, from the book of Isaiah, beating swords into plowshares. Its public framing? Peaceful uses of atomic energy. Its real function? Keep nuclear testing alive under diplomatic cover as opposition to weapons testing grew. Early cost projections made the case almost impossible to argue with. A nuclear canal came in at roughly a third the price of digging the same route by conventional means. On paper, it looked like the most rational infrastructure decision the United States could make. The testing would tell a different story. Before anyone was going to nuke a canal through Central America, they needed to prove the technology worked. So they started small. Project Gnome was the first real test. In 1961, in New Mexico, a 3.1 kiloton device was buried 1,200 feet down in a salt deposit near Carlsbad. The goal was to prove underground detonation works cleanly and the blast stays contained. Radioactive steam erupted through the borehole instead. Over 400 observers from the press and foreign nations were on site to watch. The Atomic Energy Commission told the observation party it was a partial success. The Sedan crater test came next. In 1962, in Nevada, a 104 kiloton device buried 635 feet underground displaced 12 million tons of earth in seconds. The resulting crater measured 1,280 feet wide and 320 feet deep, the largest human-made crater in the United States, and it registered 4.75 on the Richter scale. The footage exists. You can watch the desert floor buckle upward and collapse in real time. The problem was the fallout. The Sedan test contaminated more American residents than any other single nuclear test ever conducted on U.S. soil. The blast sent 2 plumes of radioactive debris northeast across the continent. Radioactive iodine turned up in milk across the Midwest from Utah to Iowa to Illinois. In Alaska, the same technology was proposed for a harbor at Cape Thompson. The local Inupiat community organized against it and stopped the detonation. The US Geological Survey quietly transported radioactive soil from Nevada tests and buried it on the site anyway, near subsistence hunting grounds. A university researcher discovered it 30 years later in declassified archives. When Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, the US immediately asked whether a nuclear bomb could solve the problem. Engineers drew up plans for a canal blasted through the Israeli desert, connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. There were nuclear highway cuts through the California mountains and nuclear river connections across the Mississippi basin. Every single one had problems. Nuclear fracking was the program's last attempt at relevance, using underground detonations to extract natural gas. The first test produced radioactive gas that could never be sold to consumers. They tried again with 2 bombs and got the same result, then tried with 3, and were planning a 4th test when the program lost funding. The United States was not doing all of this alone. The Soviet Union launched their own equivalent program called Nuclear Explosions for the National Economy, running 124 tests with 135 devices. They detonated nuclear bombs specifically to build the Panama Canal in 1971, a waterway designed to redirect river water southward. The craters are still there. The canal was never built. 2 superpowers ran parallel programs, spent billions, and wound up with the same result. By the mid-1960s, the pressure to build a second Panama Canal had become a political priority. The AEC convinced enough people that the problems were solvable, so in 1964, President Lyndon Johnson ordered the study. The commission surveyed the entire isthmus. Congress appropriated $17.5 million for the study, the equivalent of roughly $185 million today. Field teams covered ground across Panama, Colombia, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica, identifying 6 possible routes, 4 of them viable for nuclear excavation. The Nicaragua-Costa Rica border route followed existing river valleys. Lower elevation than the Panama routes meant less earth to move, making it a longer crossing but potentially the cheapest option. It was one of the 4 nuclear-viable routes formally evaluated. Route 17 was the frontrunner, running about 50 miles across the Darien jungle in eastern Panama through flat river valleys with a relatively low summit reaching about 1,100 feet above sea level. The numbers were staggering. 294 nuclear devices across 14 separate detonations, carrying the explosive equivalent of 166 million tons of TNT, more than 3 times the power of the Tsar bomber, the largest nuclear weapon ever tested. The evacuation zone covered approximately 30,000 people, nearly half of them indigenous residents with centuries-old settlements. Shockwaves were calculated to reach Costa Rica and Colombia. This was the plan that came closest to moving forward. The Colombian route through the Atrato-Turando Valley in the northwest was the other serious contender. The Atlantic side was considered nearly ideal for excavation, with an alluvial valley, minimal hard rock, and easier terrain. Slightly longer than Route 17, but geologists preferred the ground conditions. The commission went back and forth between these two for years. The final preferred nuclear route was estimated at just over $2 billion in 1970 dollars, roughly $16 billion today. What the canal would have been is worth pausing on. It would have been sea level with no locks and at least 1,000 feet wide, meaning any ship ever built could have used it. The largest container ships operating today, the ones that already strain the 2016 expanded Panama locks, would have sailed straight through without modification, with no water shortages and no drought restrictions. The canal plan collapsed because 3 separate problems arrived at the same time, and none of them had a solution. The treaty killed it legally first. The 1963 Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, signed by the US, Soviet Union, and United Kingdom, required all nuclear detonations to be underground. A canal blast is the opposite of underground. From 1963 onward, the US would have needed a formal treaty exemption from every signatory nation to proceed. That exemption was never coming. Most people covering this story miss this entirely. The fallout math killed it scientifically. The Sedan test proved that even a properly executed detonation contaminates vast populations. The Darien route sits between 2 oceans, meaning a 14 detonation sequence would push fallout over the Caribbean and the Pacific simultaneously, sending radioactive cesium and strontium into both ocean food chains. The ecological models failed at every depth and yield combination the engineers tested. The economics killed it last, and this was the one nobody expected. The cost estimate that had made the whole program compelling, $747 million in 1964, fell apart after 6 years of field surveys and engineering reality. By 1970, after $770 million spent on the program itself, the nuclear estimate had risen to $3.1 billion. In today's money, $25 billion. The conventional estimate for a different route came in at $2.88 billion, about $23 billion today. The nuclear option was now the more expensive one. The entire economic argument that had justified the program since the beginning had inverted. The Commission also concluded that canal traffic would remain within capacity until at least 1995, which removed the urgency. The program was cancelled in 1977 after 27 tests and 35 detonations, with nothing built. The Soviet Union ran 124 tests with 135 devices, nearly 5 times the American count. Same outcome. The Sedan crater is still there. It sits on the National Register of Historic Places. Thousands of tourists visit it every year. The desert vegetation inside the crater has never fully recovered. The Panama Canal was expanded in 2016. The new locks cost $5.25 billion and took about 9 years to build. They were handling congestion almost immediately. Then, the drought hit. From late 2022 through 2024, a severe El Niño weather pattern drained Gatun Lake, the freshwater reservoir that powers the entire lock system, to record lows. Authorities had to restrict daily transits from the normal 36 down to as few as 18 vessels per day. At the worst point, around 160 ships were queued up waiting. Shipping companies rerouted vessels around the Cape of Good Hope or through the Suez Canal. Freight rates spiked. The canal's fiscal year 2024 saw a 29% drop in total vessel transits. Panama is one of the rainiest countries on the planet. It was supposed to have water to spare. The fix being built now is the $1.6 billion Indio River Reservoir project, a new dam connected by a 5.5-mile tunnel to the existing Gatun Lake, creating enough additional water storage to allow more vessels through during dry seasons. Construction is expected to begin in early 2028 and wrap up around 2031. We covered the full story of the Panama Canal's water crisis in this new dam in a separate video, link in the description. The Darien jungle is still there. Route 17 survey maps still exist in US government archives. The problem the nuclear canal was designed to solve has persisted for 60 years. We're solving it one expensive dam at a time. Climate projections for Central America are trending drier. The canal's dependence on rainfall to fill its locks makes it vulnerable in ways that a sea level channel would not have been. Whether the nuclear option would have been better depends on how many more dams this century is going to need. The Darien jungle is still there. Route 17 survey maps still exist in US government archives. And the Strait of Hormuz is still closed, or open, depending on the day you're watching this. Whether nuclear excavation ever makes sense depends on one thing: how desperate the world gets before it's willing to find out. What do you think? If the technology had worked cleanly, would a sea level canal through Panama have been worth the risk? Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe for more Megabuild stories.